Hey, can you guys hear me? Ah, perfect. I wasn't sure if anyone was in here. Thank you. So I think I'll just mostly be working on. Um, do I constantly squint your eyes while shading? I wouldn't say constantly, but I do. Um, it kind of depends on the where it's at, and um, it's something I would probably do more in the beginning, especially when I'm trying to group my values together. But as I'm pretty far along, like if I'm further along in the rendering, I'm probably doing less squinting at that point. Yeah, so this is my first time streaming, so I have no idea. I couldn't tell if anyone was even in here watching it. I don't know how to even see that. Yeah, so right now I'm going to come in with a little bit darker of a value and start to separate the hair out more. Let me sharpen that up. So right now I'm just mostly focused on finding the largest masses and shapes in the hair, start to separate that out before I render out too much of the detail. I'm also kind of trying to build it up uh, again with the large masses in mind, and kind of like soft. So I'm not trying to get too particular yet. So right now I'm just taking a look. Because I got my headset on, I can't get too far away from my drawing. But I still need to like lean back a bit as I keep working it up. And again, I'm thinking very large masses and shapes. And then I'm starting to squint too at the photo because there's a lot of highlights happening in the hair. But I just want to squint down to make sure they're not like they're not hugely important. I'll probably come back and pick some of those highlights out with the eraser. And I'm really, again, just mostly focused on the overall big form, shape, and read right now. And probably, well, gee, am I gone too far up? Not really. So like a lot of probably the hair at the top too. Um, I'll probably just leave it as like almost, I don't want to say one value, but I'll probably neglect a lot of the highlights in the upper part of the hair. I kind of want that to kind of dissipate into the background. Pencil. If you guys have any other questions, feel free and ask them. And if you're wondering what's on my hand, it's no special drawing glove. It's just because like a year ago, it really hurt my hand and it hasn't fully recovered. So usually when I draw now, I have some kind of support on it. No, I'm just gonna no, I'm gonna look for a paper towel real quick. Oh, here we go. So here I'm just gonna come in and blend a lot of this together. I'll be careful that I don't over blend it. Just kind of knock back some of the texture from that softer pencil. So my study schedule was a lot of times I was also doing freelance work at the same time. So I always had to work around that aspect of it and working on, my classical education as well too. But usually I set up a good amount of time to um, in between like a class or two I was taking, um, really copying a lot of work out of like Vanderpool, Loomis, and just a lot of other artists that I like Line Decker. I used to do a lot of studies from that, from him, I should say, um, and Sargent and whatnot. So it was just like there wasn't like I didn't have a specific schedule in mind. I just made sure I was always working on practicing other things in my downtime. So like for me, because of the other stuff I was doing, uh, mine wasn't. I didn't have like a set schedule on this day I practice this or and whatnot. I just kind of picked up whatever I felt like working on for that day. And that was kind of it. Um, because sometimes you just have to work around with whatever you have. If you're lucky to be a full-time student, um, then that's good. You can set up a much more disciplined schedule of practicing multiple things, like studying like head drawing on certain days and studying the figure on other days, doing master studies, and etc. But I know there was a time when earlier where I would go through. I was really interested in construction-based drawing, so I would study a lot out of the Michael Hampton book, uh, the Figure Drawing, Design, and Invention, and then I would also take that and in my uh, like open figure drawing sessions, I would focus a lot more on, especially when I was doing a lot of more illustration work and I was super busy, where and I didn't have time for a whole lot of classes. I didn't care as much about getting a finished. I'm using that word in quotes. Finished drawing in 2 to 3 hours. That wasn't as important to me anymore, and I wanted to really focus on structure and trying to see the form. So I spent my 2 to 3 hour open figure drawing time trying to understand and see that stuff. It's like it's not about getting a finished rendering. I want a nice linear constructed line drawing. But if you're looking to set up like a specific schedule for yourself, um, first you need to figure out how much time it is you can dedicate each week. To your art, obviously if you have, I mean, depending on your age and your situation, like if you have a full-time job or if you have kids or a relationship, a lot of that will eat up study time. So you have to first figure out how much time you can dedicate, and then maybe simplify it down. If you don't have a whole lot of time, then I would recommend focusing on certain aspects. Um, for example, I would probably just focus more on head drawing than I would on the figure, just because the figure is a lot more to learn. It's a lot more complicated. You can learn so much just by doing the head. It's much easier to, you can learn how to finish something more because it's less to understand. So it's easier to focus and dedicate your time. If you have a lot of time available, then you just need to, and this always is going to depend on your skill level or what you're at and what you want to learn or what you want to get better at. But if you're a full-time, if you have like 40 hours a week you can dedicate to learning, then you're going to want to think about a schedule that will basically cover all the bases. Like if you're new, you mostly want to be focusing on just learning how to draw. So again, it's like you want to work on just good proportion, good gesture, structure. You have time to put in to anatomy probably, at least to start learning it. As well as like probably just learning other aspects as well too. Like still life is always an important thing to learn, even if you don't plan on doing it. But like for learning how to draw and see basic, simple shapes, what better thing to do than just to throw up a cup and start practicing basic cylindrical and spherical forms and understanding perspective. Now I'm starting to think of some other things I used to study as well too. They'll start coming to mind once I, it jogs my memory. Like there's a time when I wanted to learn more about anatomy. Like I took a few anatomy classes, but I would say I mostly learned it on my own. And one way that was beneficial for me, and this is something I might add on my Patreon later, because for me, I thought it was a very interesting idea what I did, but it was kind of inspired by it's an anatomy book that had like all the old masters in it by Robert Beverly Hale or whatever. But what I did was I would take tracing paper over, old masters' work, over Frazetta's work, any illustrator I could find that was more figurative. So there's, a lot of anatomy showing. And I would have an anatomy chart in front of me, not blatantly just boring copy of the anatomy chart. 'Cause that can be, again, a lot of people don't want to do that. And that's very boring just to copy an anatomy chart. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but like what I did was had the chart in front of me, put the tracing paper, and I tried to figure out the anatomy that way. So to me, it was like doing a master study along with learning anatomy, seeing how that artist interpreted that anatomy. And I felt like that was very helpful, especially when you see like Frazetta, for example, because I use him, like a lot of his anatomy doesn't always look the most spectacular, but when you actually put the tracing paper over it, it's like, oh, he knew it pretty well. Just he would sometimes just design it he did a lot of those paintings very quickly, so there wasn't always, or at least that's the legend goes, he painted a lot of those paintings very quickly, and there's going to be some cut corners in that, but once you actually start to sit there, like I did with the tracing paper, I'm like, oh, it gave me a much different understanding of how he saw anatomy or how he was manipulating it for his paintings. So I hope that was somewhat insightful. Now I'm just starting to just take a look at the drawing and see all the mess that I made by pushing around the tone. And another thing I actually would recommend too is it's always good to learn different disciplines of art. And what I mean by that is, say your goal is to just be a painter. A lot of like the students I've had, especially some of the older students, they just want to paint, which is fine. And, there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but in my understanding, for the most part, if you can't draw, you really can't paint. Now, there's obviously some exceptions to that, but like overall, that's like a belief that I have. Like the better your foundation is in drawing, most likely the better your painting will turn out. So you always want to learn different disciplines. And where I was kind of getting with that is like learning inking. Inking is a valuable, like you may not like ink or you may not want to do it, but it's a valuable skill to learn. Like you don't ever have to make art with it, but there's a lot of things that it can teach you. For example, it's going to make you a much better decision maker, or at least theoretically, it should make you a better decision maker. And that is because there's no erasing when you ink. So everything you put down has to be thought out before you put it down, or you're going to end up with a big mess. Especially if you don't have any planned underneath, like a pencil drawing underneath your ink. Obviously, you can always pre-plan your inks, but like a lot of times when I would go to the zoo and sketch, I would do it in pen because I had to. That forced me to sketch on the fly, think, and make some, hopefully, thought out and smart decisions. And a lot of times when you're painting or drawing, especially after you've done it for a while, you can become very you can kind of go on autopilot. You're not thinking as much, or that can happen. You kind of just go on autopilot. You do your thing, and you're not always fully aware. But then when you're again learning something new, it'll keep that awareness sharp. And like I said, inking will kind of force that on you, or at least it did for me. So like that's why I enjoy. I will still sketch in pen. I would be inking more if I didn't jack up my hand because it's something I do enjoy doing, but it's always something I recommend too, just because I feel like it was a valuable lesson, and I learned a lot from doing it. And it's usually making me more aware and thinking about about what it is I am doing in the moment. The other thing too that you'll learn from it is you'll learn much better hand control. Again, because those lines, you can't erase them. So you have to not only think about, but you'll help build up your dexterity and hand control to help execute those very direct, thought out lines. And of course, inking, especially if you like to draw, it goes hand in hand. It's another drawing implement. So a lot of the calligraphy I've picked up over the years, inking helped out with. Especially if you like one of my favorite inkers is Joseph Clement Cole. And I would draw from his stuff all the time. I really like the way, it's like pretty chaotic. Excuse me, I just need to drink water here. Some of it's pretty chaotic, but I like it. And those lines, again, they help show you and dictate the form. Like those lines need to properly sculpt out the form for it to work. Again, that type of direct understanding, a lot of times simplifying it too. Like right here, the stuff I'm putting in the hair, that's no different than if I'm inking it with a pen. That's where, again, a lot of that comes from. So that's another thing you want to add to your study schedule if you can, is just start to pick up, again, depending on your time and your goals, but like pick up different materials and learn. Also look at, like, again, different other, respected artists' work. Again, even if you don't like ink, there's nothing wrong with, excuse me, picking up like a Joseph Clement Cole book and look at the inking. Same with comic books too. Like there's some really great comic book inkers. It's still good to go look at that stuff. Especially there's a lot that you can actually learn from really good comic book artists. Ones that have great shape design. Because the wonderful thing about ink is, again, it has to read well at black and white. So your shapes, if you really want to learn shapes and see those better, go look at inkers. Because when it comes to painting, a lot of that is all going to be very shape driven. I mean, again, depending on the type of painter you want to be, but all those different skills in learning different materials and types of art supplies will all pay off. So I'm looking at the hair here. What's nice about drawing hair is that it can be a very, just to continue on talking about ink and line work and calligraphy, is that my calligraphy, all the marks I'm making is dictated by the shapes in her hair that I see and the direction that the hair is flowing in and the way it's wrapping around the form. Hi, Paul. Good to see you. And so again, that goes back to inking still. And sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought. It's seeing the line. So like when I'm rendering out her hair here, like I want to make that distinction. It's like I'm not trying to be the artist that renders out every strand. I'm not being a photorealist or anything like that. But I'm looking for how those strands oftentimes group together or forming shapes and lines that I can use to help make interesting calligraphy in the drawing here. And so if you're, again, like trying to just get better at even, say, just calligraphy in general, hair is always a great place to start. To me, it's like I don't want to say a freebie, but it's like a giveaway. The hair really does help you to see the form. And that could also be because I used to do so many pet portraits, a long time ago, just drawing all the dogs and cats, especially like dogs with, much longer or crazier hair. Um, you'll start to learn. That's one of the areas where I kind of probably started to pick that up as well too. Is just drawing so much animal hair and fur was, again, very helpful in me getting probably good at just working on people's hair and learning, again, back to calligraphy and learning mark making. Because for me personally, I don't want my stuff to look rendered out, so to speak. I don't want it to look photo real or really blended. I want nice texture. I want good form. I want interesting, varied marks. I don't want to just be here. I'm putting something down, wiping it out, putting it down, wiping it out. I want a lot of thought put into my work, into the marks that I'm making. To me, that's just another form of creativity, which people don't always talk about that in being creative. It's about coming up with interesting ideas. But to me, it's like, oh no, there's other ways to use your brain creativity, creatively, and it's coming up with again, it's like interesting marks, designing out what you can get away with. What can I do here to make it more interesting? Again, the more you can study, the more variety of skills you can put in your tool belt, so to speak, the more options you're going to have. Um, Hey, Paul Mitchell. Um, so, okay, I can talk about that real quick. I'm curious. No, the last part was very frowned upon. The workshop you took, as in you didn't like it, or your work was frowned upon. I kind of just don't understand the last part of um, the last sentence there. But when it comes to how dark will I go with my grades, um, I guess I'll go full. It depends on the goal of the drawing. Um, so if you see like a lot of the more like simple head sketches I've done, or some of the figure sketches, which I would post more, but Instagram no longer like allows that stuff. Those aren't full value. Working from photos is frowned upon. Okay. Um, I'll talk about the dark grades first, and then I'll go back to the photos. Um, but it kind of depends on, for full value. Again, that's something I'm gonna put in quotes, full value, because technically speaking, like graphite can't go full value, or its full value is a much more limited range compared to something like charcoal. when you're using it normally. Now, there's certain techniques you can do to darken up graphite, but that's another story. Um, so it kind of first you kind of just need to understand, excuse me, your limit with a medium in terms of how dark it can go. Obviously, when you're working on paper, generally speaking, it's white, so you have that advantage of you're going to have your whitest white, which is going to be the paper most of the time. Now, obviously, there's different drawing papers, but again, we're generalizing here. So when you have the paper, a white paper, you're going to have your whitest white. But do you need to necessarily always have to go full range? Yes or no. I would say in like my earlier work, I tended to push my values too far because I would try to get full value. And I think like when I look back at some of the older stuff, it's like, I didn't need to go that dark with it. So it kind of depends. And I'll try to save like my darkest values towards the end now and see where they're needed. But a lot of that actually comes down to it becomes more of a design process too. You want to kind of think about how dark you want to go. Like I said, a lot of that's more complicated just because it becomes how do you want your finished work to look? And that's going to be different for every piece of work you make. Unless you're a specific artist, you have a look and you always go super dark and everything's more subtle. Maybe you don't have a full range of value, but everything's darker, more, or I don't say muted, but yeah, it's overall much darker in value. It's moodier. So you're not going to be using a white anymore, probably. So like, yeah, so to kind of answer the full value thing, or what grades I'll go in, it always is going to depend on, I think, what I'm trying to say with it. Now, when I'm just drawing from life, for example, they say I'm in a 3-hour setting, then that might be different, where I might try to push everything because I want to try to get a finished look in 3 hours. But too, that still is kind of like, to be a design, more of a design choice. And ultimately what you're trying to say with it. But I would try to stay away from going too dark too early on. And if you have an organization of your values, that's much easier to control. Now you might see some artists, they'll blast the darks in right away, and that's okay. Usually a lot of those artists I see that do that, they have their technique down, their skill level is pretty high. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. It's just, there's always different approaches and things that people do, but usually those artists that are doing that have a high level of skill, so they know how to get out of those situations. Now about drawing from photos, ideally you always want to draw from life. That is the best way to learn because you'll have a much better understanding of how things work in real life. Cameras distort, you're drawing from a flat surface. You're basically translating a flat object to a flat surface, which isn't a great way to learn how form and three-dimensionality really work. But I'm not going to, I'm drawing from a photo right now. And I haven't done life drawing in 4 years. I think I've done one session. And I had a friend pose for me. So I haven't done a whole lot of life work. I miss it. I want to get back into doing it, but it is the best way of learning, though, is drawing from life. Just because you'll learn so much more. The camera also will make certain translations that you won't see. A lot of times things might get too dark. But if you've done a lot of life work, you'll pick that up. Be like, oh, if you have a lot of good life drawing foundation underneath you, then drawing from photos isn't so bad because you can use that stuff that you've learned from drawing from life and studying other artists and implement that into the photos that you're drawing from. Excuse me. Doing a lot of talking now, so now I need to drink a lot of water. But if photos are your only option, then that's not bad either. You got to do something to learn the skills, and if all you have right now is to draw from photos, then there's nothing wrong with that. It's all about learning and doing the best that you can with what you've got. So yeah, no, I'm not against drawing from photos at all, but I do understand why some people frown upon it. But because you're just going to learn a lot more from life. But if that's not your situation, do what you can to learn the skills. Like, you don't need to draw from life to improve your hand dexterity. You can learn all that stuff from, watching other artists and practicing drawing yourself. Just start drawing. Yeah, so that's understandable, and the best thing you can do is from photos. Do that. What I would actually recommend, though, if all you have are photos, I would actually just change photos to master studies. So you'll learn a lot more that way because you haven't take an old master, take sergeant for whatnot, and start doing those type of studies because you'll learn more that way than you will from a photo. The photo won't teach you quite as much other than just getting, practicing a lot of basic foundations of just getting a structure down and whatnot. But it's not going to teach you, like a lot of artists are making certain design choices in their paintings. So you'll learn more of that by doing master studies. So if you need to make a change, I would, or if you wanted something else to do besides photos, I would just start drawing from, start adding, master studies in your practice time. Oh yeah, if you're drawing from your own photos too, that's good as well because you can at least control um, your the lens you use and you can get more interesting things with your practicing different angles and all that. Any master studies? S- uh, well, first I would go through. Do I have it down here? Yeah, just a second. So I think I mentioned this earlier, but if you don't have this book, pick it up, especially if you're just practicing head studies. So like anything out of Loomis here is great. See if we could get. Let me try to find the I page. So like, or Loomis. Sorry, yeah, Loomis is great. Vanderpool is the the book that I have. For whatever reason, I always interchange their names, and I have no idea why I do it. But for example, like these may not look. Let's see if I can get closer without it blurring out. Whatever, like just like the basic eye shapes in here. Like studying from this book is hugely helpful in just learning the simplification. Oops, sorry. And getting a good effective read out of these features. Like these aren't overly complicated drawings in here, but they read so well, and that's one of the design aspects you'll get out of the book. Because that's John Vanderpool. If you don't have that book, but other artists again like Sargent, Rockwell, Zorn, Andrew Zorn, um, um, who else? I mean, any old master would really work. Line Decker, who I mentioned earlier. Um, like the thing I wouldn't recommend as much would be like, unless you were trying to get that look, but like if you were to go back to like Renaissance artists, unless you're looking for that specific, like a Michelangelo or a Leonardo look to your art, I don't recommend those as much, just because they tend to be less realistic looking. So if you're trying to again be like more like you want more of that realistic look, yeah, like Sargent, Zorn, Soroya. I don't believe I totally blew that name. I lost that one out of my head. Um, um, who else? I mean, there's plenty. I wish I just had my. I lost so many of my art books in the flood, which sucks. But of course they would all be in storage in San Diego, and I have nothing here with me in New York. Um, yeah, sorry, my mind's blank. I know I'm gonna think of a bunch as soon as I'm done recording or done streaming, but that's usually how it goes. Actually, Rubens, if you want to go back, I don't. He's not quite. He's past Renaissance, but like, Rubens has some awesome stuff to look at. Um, oh, I mean, Michelangelo's sculptures are always actually really good to look at too. That is great sculptural. They're just great sculptural. They're just well sculpted. The edge work is great. It's phenomenal. So like looking at even uh, some of his like I would if you're gonna look at like, go back that far to the Renaissance, I would look at his Michelangelo's sculptures because they're absolutely amazing, and you can learn a lot um, about edge work and design from those. You also have Bernini, who is obviously after Michelangelo, who has great sculptural, I mean great sculptures to look at. You're welcome. Yeah, I'm so glad people showed up. I really thought like the first 15 minutes, like I didn't know anyone was in here. So I wasn't talking. I was like, oh, I guess I'll just draw, and if somebody says something, I'll start talking. But it's more fun when there's people to talk to. Ah. How did you like the course? That's why I take it you're in the UK then? Or in Europe somewhere? And some other books I would recommend, though these books are near impossible to get, and I just lost like my whole collection of them, which sucks. But if you can find them, they are like a lot of the Russian figure drawing books. I had a bunch of Russian figure drawing books in Chinese, so they were imported. And I used to get them at a bookstore in LA. Fortunately, they don't carry them anymore. And it sucks I lost all of them. But if you can find those, like I don't have any specific names. You just have to type in Russian figure drawing book. But there's some amazing work to study out of there as well too. Okay, now I'm just going to take the eraser. I think I'm going to start to just carve out some of those highlights. I just want to change it up and talk about something a little bit different. Who knows, I might knock them back out. Um, but yeah, just going to start using the kneaded eraser here, which is great because I can change it to a bunch of different sizes and shapes to help carve out the information. If I go too light with it, again, I can knock it back. So at this stage of the drawing, I'm still just, I was about to say have fun, but it's like, no, that's not. I mean, you always want to be having fun throughout all the stages. But like, I'm not so worried about being really particular with it. So I'm trying to not be uptight and just see how things go and try different things out. Again, I'm not always copying the shapes either 100% to the photo. If there's something I don't like, I'm going to try to redesign it. Um, and that's kind of like one of the things I guess um, you probably learn a little bit more in life drawing as opposed to just working from photos, where when you're in a timed situation, it forces you more to think and make choices. Where if you're just going to spend hours upon hours and you're just copying it, that can be not I don't want to say bad, but like it's not may not be quite as productive, especially if you're trying to um, not be like a render person. You're trying to make more painterly or more designerly aspects to your work. So like, say I don't like that later, I'm gonna leave it for now. I don't care. But like, if I don't like it, it's not too hard to just take the towel and knock it back. Easy to go back over it. But probably what I won't do is like hit some of maybe a few of the highlights over here, but not too many because I want again the focus to be more on the at least for the hair part to be over here. And then obviously the main focus is gonna be in the face later on. Um, but I don't want to like overdo the hair and render it out. I'm just gonna hit a few spots. But like this drawing for me isn't supposed to be like a quick life study. Like this will probably end up being a let's see, maybe I'm trying to think of how many hours I've put into it already. Maybe 3 hours I put in already, but I'll probably end up putting. It could go anywhere from 10 to 30. That's gonna be the range. I don't know how long it's gonna take me, but it'll probably be somewhere in there. Older drawings, it probably would definitely be 30, but um, I've done this for a long time now. I don't know if I'll be putting in that many hours, but I could. So it'll be somewhere in the 10 to 30 hour range. So kind of like just to kind of like talk about, I'll probably just stream for another 10, 15 minutes. But I want to discuss. So how I was talking about how I don't want stuff to be rendered. There's a difference between, to me anyways, it always depends on, everyone's going to explain things differently, but there's a difference between rendered and tight. So like a tight drawing can look rendered, to be very well thought out, but it can be very, it might have the illusion of rendered, but there's a lot of brushwork everywhere, or a lot of interesting marks. Where to me, rendered is more somebody that kind of puts marks down, blends it all out, puts stuff down. Ultimately, it's all blended and super smooth, and something more like that to me is rendered. Where tight can have the same look, but there's interesting marks happening. So I personally like a kind of like a mix of having some tight areas and some loose areas, and I don't want it to necessarily be rendered. But again, that's just my way of explaining it. Everyone else might explain it a little bit differently. Because like a tight painting is still going to be, a lot of work put into it, very clean. It's just not, like I said, it's not to me. Um, rendered to look like a photo or whatever. And right now I'm just kind of jumping all over the place, kind of seeing what needs to be added at this stage. I also need to get away from it more. I haven't really been doing that too much. Well, actually, I'll just zoom out so you guys can see the whole thing. I mean, I haven't done anything on the face at all, but it'll give you a better idea of, I think, the values. Let me lower it. And kind of just to talk about the value grade so much. So like the reason I mostly focus on the hair too is like I've kept my overall separation of the values uh, pretty good. Like this hasn't been. I mean, there's some smudge marks I need to clean up, but the face hasn't been done yet. So I've been mostly sticking to the darker values. Um, I could probably start putting in some halftones. I won't be doing that yet, anyways. That'll probably be later, but like just to kind of like talk about the value control a bit more is like I don't want to jump into kind of how I mentioned earlier. You don't want to like blast in your black right away, your darkest value, but you also don't want to. I mean, depending on the medium. If it's charcoal, yeah, but whatever. That's different. Never mind. Just ignore that. um, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But like, it's the same reason why you don't want to like blast a dark too early on. It's the same way you don't want to jump into your halftones. Like if you blast a dark too early on, it just doesn't look good, or if you don't have the control. But like but the same thing can happen if you jump into your halftones too early. Excuse me. So like if you're jumping into your halftones too early, your whole drawing will ultimately become, or can become, too dark. So you'd be fighting that battle. Because if I got into my halftones too early and my dark values weren't established well enough, you'll have this battle between you'll start building up your halftones and you realize everything's like kind of the same value. Then you go back to your darks, you jump back into the halftones, and everything will just ultimately become too dark because you'll have that fight going on between your light and dark values. And that's just when it comes down to just having good control and separating your light masses and your dark masses, very early on in your drawing. Now that could be different because of certain. There can be certain lighting situations. Obviously, like if you have a cloudy day where there's a lot less overall full value going on, a lot less shadows, then of course you're gonna have a different approach for that. But for the most part, when you're learning and you're working from life, you're gonna have a direct light source on the model. You're gonna want to focus on really keeping those values clean and organized, and then slowly build things up. So like in a normal drawing, like I've worked here, that's why I draw out my shapes. I'll put in the first two value where it's just the white of the paper and one value in the shadow or the dark areas. And once that looks good, I'll start to build up some darker values and some more darker values. And then I'll start jumping into the halftones. But when I'm working in those darker values in the first early stages, I don't jump up to black. I stay away from that. It's kind of a slow buildup. But again, certain mediums, like charcoal, you can work faster. So you might do things a little bit differently. But overall, you want it to be a slow buildup. Even when you're in a life drawing situation where you might only have 2 or 3 hours, you really want to focus on taking your time, even if you don't get a finished drawing. So it's like taking your time, slowing down, looking, seeing, and basically following the procedure. So for that, yeah, part of that's a stylistic choice. It's also just a sketch. So if I'm thinking about the ones you're thinking about, it's basically actually where's oh, just a second. So you're thinking one like that. So if you're thinking one of those drawings like this, yeah, it's stylistic. A lot of that is decision making, but it's also decision making based on the fact that I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. This is just like a warm up or a quick exercise I spend 1 to 2 hours on, and that's it. So it's yeah, from that standpoint, it's stylistically design choices I'm making based on the allotted time I want to put into it. So just to briefly just bring back up the photo thing again. So like there's some very dark values underneath her chin here that's happening in the photograph. Now that might be a little bit different in a life setting. It may also be just as dark as well too. But a lot of times photos tend to darken up things more, but that might also just be whatever camera setting you have on it. But just because it's that dark down here in the in the photo, I probably won't push that value as dark as I see it in the photo because I don't want it to necessarily compete with the hair and what's going on in the face. So I'll probably in the end keep this much lighter um, down there, or at least that's my thought right now. We'll see what happens in the end. That's why I've put many more hours into it, but that's my current um, just thought on that area right now, and just again working from photos. Now, my earlier days, I probably would make it just as dark, maybe darker, um, just because it's like that in the photo. But now, so much I may not do that. I'll probably keep it a little bit lighter. And since I've been working on the hair the whole time, it's like the thing too about hair is like I'm not worried about the texture so much right now. Now there might be some texture happening from some of the lines and I'm starting to refine it, but overall like there's a lot of texture happening right here. I don't care about that right now. Now will I worry about that later or get more textural aspects in the hair? Yeah, most likely, but first and foremost, um, for me, it's about getting the form down first, and then texture is a secondary thing. Um, just because, like, to me, that's more important. At least when you're first starting out, you don't want to. People get really, I don't want to say obsessed isn't the right word. Maybe it's just, inexperienced, but people go very textural with the hair first, and it doesn't look good because they don't understand the form of it first. So you want to really focus on getting the form of the hair down first, and then worry about the texture secondary. Now that might be again. That's when you're first starting out. Later, you might make design choices where you just put certain textural stuff down for the hair, and you kind of just leave it. It's very interesting to see certain things that artists do. Like a lot of artists will leave hair very vague. They don't render it out quite as much, and it becomes more of just like a shape with maybe a few other shapes inside and maybe one highlight. Again, depending on the situation and the artist, but like people, a lot of times artists really simplify down the hair. Where I kind of do, I'll be doing the opposite. I'll be rendering it out quite a bit more, but like probably leave the top part more simplified. So it kind of is going to be like softer up here, a little bit more mysterious or vague in the information, and then I'll bring out more information down here. And ultimately, I'll probably keep some of this stuff out here much more softer and really just focus on tightening up as I get closer into the face and the details later on. Yeah, I probably have to start working on some of the darker values in the face. I'm going to stop here in about a minute. But like the hair is looking pretty good overall at this stage. I'm happy with the way it's going. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more work that needs to be done. But I'm probably going to start later working on bringing up some of the features in the face more, especially since the face is the most important. I'll probably start working on that to a finish and then go back to the hair afterwards. Generally speaking, in a drawing, I don't put this much time in the hair, then go down to the face. I think just for the stream, I just wanted to focus on the hair because there's only so much I can move around with the camera. Oh well, it's 8:30, so yeah, I'm gonna call it quits for today. I want to thank you guys for showing up and watching me draw and listening to me babble. Hopefully, some of that was insightful and helpful. And I'm sure I'll stream more. I'm not sure when. I don't have a specific thing set up for streaming yet, but I know I'll start adding more actual YouTube content soon. But thank you all, and I'll see you later.